Let's get more on our top story now and take a look at the key points of the draft climate change agreement reached in Paris. If adopted, the deal will limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, with a commitment to strive towards capping temperature rises to 1.5 degrees Celsius. If ratified by the nearly 200 nations, the agreement will be legally binding, and a minimum of $100 billion a year will be provided by developed nations to help poorer countries deal with climate change from 2020. Well, Smita Nakhooda is a research fellow at the Overseas Development Institute. She joins us live from Paris. Good afternoon. How significant, how much of a good deal is this?
This is hugely significant and by many estimates exceeds many people's expectations of what the negotiations here in Paris could deliver. So I think morale is extremely high in anticipation of a good agreement that sets us on track to really start to grapple with one of the pressing challenges of our time in a way that's good for all countries.
Is it workable? Is it achievable, Smita?
Well, what this agreement does is build on national efforts to look at what they can offer in terms of efforts to reduce emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. And that's the fundamental building block of this agreement. And what those offers amount to is an important dent in reducing emissions and increasing our resilience to climate change, but it's not enough. So what this agreement also now offers is a clear process through which countries will be able to both make progress in implementing what they've said they think they'll be able to do, but also revise and review progress against those initial objectives so they can ratchet emission up over time. And in order to enable that, this agreement also makes available finance, technology, and capacity building support in order to help developing countries do that in a way that doesn't impede their development objectives.
Okay.
And it also enables a lot of information sharing and learning.
Yeah, it's the developing nations, isn't it, that perhaps are of a concern to some, that while there is an awful lot of money on the table from 2020, whether they will be able to be as efficient as reducing emissions, as efficient as changing to renewable energies. Do you have confidence that they can?
Well, I think developing countries have demonstrated immense leadership on this agenda, and developing countries have actually been at the vanguard of innovations in development that are lower carbon and more resilient to climate change. So you see the largest volumes of clean energy being deployed in developing countries at the lowest costs. Now, of course, finance is going to be essential in order to help these countries continue on this path, but I think the intention is there, and this agreement begins to enable these countries to achieve those goals that they're setting for themselves.
How does it sit, though, Smita, when you've got countries like India building new coal-fired power stations? They are terribly poor countries in some parts of the country, and then you have these ambitious targets that they need to meet and are legally binding.
Right. I mean, this is the fundamental trade-off that all countries confront to some extent, not just developing countries. How do we scale up investment in things that are good for the environment and also scale back investment in the ways of the past that are perhaps cheaper at face value, but actually increasingly costly in terms of their implications for our future well-being as a planet? Finance can help. Continued effort to implement and get better at deploying cleaner, less carbon-intensive options at better cost more effectively can also help. And that, in the end, this virtuous cycle of implementation is what this agreement needs to help us all foster in all countries.
As you say, an important step. What do you see as the next step? What has to happen in the next year or 2 years?
Well, as they say, the hard part starts now in terms of actually implementing the agreement as it has been envisioned to be executed. And that's going to take a monumental effort at home in all countries. Now, here in Paris, we've seen a multitude of actors come forward with very promising initiatives aimed in this direction. So we've seen investors committing to mobilizing billions of dollars of new investment in clean energy and resilient development. We've seen several investors committing to getting out of high carbon investment, cities making commitments to doing more on clean energy and resilience. So we see action happening at a multitude of levels, but the key part is getting serious about this and accelerating action going forward into next year, so that the next time we come to revisit our actions on climate, we're in a much better position in terms of meeting the goal that this agreement starts to set.
Smita Nakhooda, thank you very much for talking to us here on Sky News.